What if a single moment, no press release, no speech, no carefully worded statement, was powerful enough to stop the internet in its tracks? Last night, at one of fashion's most closely watched events, two of China's most private stars did exactly that. And the world hasn't looked away since. For a long time, there was nothing loud to point to, only quiet patterns that refused to disappear. Moments that felt unremarkable on their own, yet strangely persistent when viewed together. Careful distance, measured timing, appearances that never crossed the line, yet always seemed to orbit one another. That silence became its own language. In an industry where every move is often calculated, silence is rarely accidental. It can be protection, it can be patience, or sometimes it is simply preparation. For months, the public narrative surrounding Chen Zheyuan and Li Qin existed entirely in that space, unconfirmed, unspoken, unresolved. Fans learned to read between the lines rather than the headlines, a shared atmosphere instead of shared statements, nothing to prove, nothing to deny, and perhaps that was the most compelling part, because anticipation grows strongest, not in certainty, but in restraint. When silence stretches long enough, it stops feeling empty. It begins to feel intentional. And once intention is sensed, the audience knows something is coming. The storm, when it arrives, is never sudden. It is simply the moment silence chooses to end. When the moment finally arrived, it did not announce itself. There was no build-up designed for attention, no theatrical pause meant for spectacle. It unfolded naturally, almost quietly, yet carried a weight that words could not have matched. In a setting defined by composure and presentation, what stood out was not excess, but sincerity, a closeness that felt unforced, a connection that did not ask to be interpreted, only noticed. What made this moment powerful was not what happened, but how it happened. It was brief, restrained, and undeniably human. In a world where declarations are often scripted, this felt unscripted. And because of that, it resonated far beyond the physical gesture itself. This was not about confirming rumours. It was about choosing presence over explanation. Sometimes, clarity does not come from saying more. It comes from saying nothing at all, and allowing an action to stand on its own. That is why this moment lingered. Not because it demanded belief, but because it offered honesty. And honesty, when it appears unexpectedly, has a way of cutting through even the loudest noise. This moment felt different because it challenged expectations without trying to disrupt them. There was no rebellion against the system, no attempt to redefine celebrity culture. And yet, it quietly shifted something. Both figures have long been associated with restraint, professionalism, and emotional distance from the public eye. Their appeal was built on craft rather than exposure, on consistency rather than surprise, which is precisely why this single moment carried such emotional weight. It did not feel impulsive. It felt considered. Audiences tend to forgive spectacle, but they trust intention. And what people sensed here was intention, calm, grounded, and unhurried. This was not a performance for validation. It was a choice made in full awareness of its visibility. When public figures allow themselves to be seen without explanation, it creates a rare sense of balance. They are neither hiding nor oversharing. They are simply being present. That balance is difficult to achieve. And when it happens, audiences recognize it instinctively. That is why this moment did not fade quickly. It settled, and in settling, it stayed with people. The reaction did not arrive all at once. It spread layer by layer, emotion by emotion. Initial surprise gave way to reflection. Excitement softened into warmth. What followed was not outrage or division, but conversation. People replayed the moment, not to dissect it, but to understand it. To ask not, is this real? But why does this feel genuine? Online spaces filled with interpretations rather than accusations. Edits focused on emotion rather than exposure. Discussions leaned towards meaning instead of confirmation. That shift matters. In an era where instant judgment is common, this response felt slower, more thoughtful, as though viewers collectively sensed that this was not a moment to rush past. Perhaps because it reminded people of something familiar, that meaningful connections do not always announce themselves loudly. Sometimes they reveal themselves gently and trust the audience to feel the rest. The internet did what it does best when given something authentic. It reflected it back, amplified by emotion rather than noise. What remains after the attention settles is not the image itself, but the feeling it left behind. A sense that something sincere had passed through a very public space without losing its integrity. This moment did not redefine celebrity culture. It simply reminded people of what they miss within it. That visibility does not have to mean vulnerability on demand. That authenticity does not require explanation. And that some stories are strongest when they unfold at their own pace. In choosing subtlety over spectacle, this moment stood apart. It offered no conclusion, only direction. And perhaps that is why it feels memorable. Because it respected both the individuals involved and the audience watching. Not everything needs to be clarified immediately. Some moments are meant to be felt first, understood later. In that sense, this was not just a viral highlight. It was a pause, a reminder that even in an industry built on attention, quiet sincerity can still leave the deepest mark. And long after the headlines move on, that is what people remember. If you enjoyed this kind of thoughtful, respectful storytelling, where emotion meets observation, don't forget to subscribe to LVT-SHOWBIZ. Your support helps us continue bringing you stories that celebrate authenticity, artistry, and the moments that truly move us. Thank you for watching, thank you for being here, and we'll see you in the next story. Until then, stay curious and stay kind.